New York, 6 a.m. The air is cold. A biting wind cuts through the skyscrapers. An elderly woman, dressed in a silver-gray janitor uniform, slowly pushes a floor-mopping cart across the damp sidewalk. She steps through the back entrance of a 42-story skyscraper, the headquarters of Novacor Financial, one of the most powerful financial corporations in the United States. Employees walk past her without a glance, no greetings. To them, she's nothing more than a silent shadow. But what they don't know is, that woman is Loretta Hayes, the very founder of Novacor, built from nothing with her bare hands 30 years ago. And today she has returned. No announcement, no title, no authority. Only one thing in her heart: trust that has been broken, because rumors have begun to seep through the cold steel floors. Whispers of toxic culture, abuses of power, and the crushing of the vulnerable. She hasn't come to speak, she's come to listen, to observe, and if necessary, to fight. Because sometimes, to truly understand how rotten a tower has become, you have to go all the way down to the bottom floor. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. 4:57 a.m. A worn grey sedan pulled up to the curb outside the headquarters of Novacor Financial. The towering glass skyscraper, once hailed as a symbol of strength and integrity in the finance world. The car door opened. Loretta Hayes stepped out, her hand gripping the frayed strap of an old canvas bag. On her back was a small backpack containing something no one would have expected. A silver-white wig, rubber gloves, a baseball cap, reading glasses, and a name tag bearing faint smudged letters, Janice, Night Shift Custodian. It had been nearly 3 years since Loretta last set foot in this building. The place that once displayed her portrait in the main lobby, that once echoed with applause when she announced she was handing over leadership to her son, Michael. But today, no one welcomed Loretta Hayes. Today, she returned in the shadows. After retiring, Loretta had withdrawn from the public eye, distancing herself from the chaos of the market. But anonymous messages, whispers from former employees, and one short email 3 weeks ago had kept her awake for nights. I used to believe Novacor was a good place, but now it's become hell. If you still care, please come. Not as the founder, but as a human being. She read it again and again. The words weren't flowery, but they cut deep. And so she made her decision to infiltrate the company herself. No warning, no title, no protection. She no longer trusted the polished numbers in the annual reports. She wanted to see what Novacor had truly become. The moment Loretta stepped through the back entrance for logistics staff, she sensed the difference. Gone were the warm greetings and cheerful "have a great day" phrases that used to fill this space. The janitorial staff passed one another like shadows. Heads down, silent, avoiding eye contact. A lean, middle-aged Asian man approached her without a smile. "You Janice?" Loretta nodded. "Ronald Tran, night shift lead, your cart's over there. You've got restrooms on floors 3, 5, and 7 today. If someone blocks your way, just move aside. Don't ask questions." Loretta froze, not because of the words, but the way they were spoken. Cold, so cold it felt soulless. She pushed the janitor's cart forward, quietly moving through corridors that were once filled with pride and hope. Now something about them had changed. Not the paint on the walls, but the soul within them. She didn't yet know exactly what she would uncover. But one thing was already clear. This was no longer the Novacor she had built. 7:36 a.m., 41st floor. Inside a glass-walled office overlooking the entire city, Michael Hayes stood by his desk, holding a cup of black coffee. He looked down at the streets below, where the rush of people had begun their day in frantic motion. And he, up here at the top, began his morning with hope. Michael was only 34, but he'd been running Novacor for nearly 3 years. He took over after his mother, Loretta, retired, and since then had tried to uphold her founding philosophy: human-centered finance, profit born from trust. Every morning he asked himself the same question: am I doing what she would have hoped? A chime from his computer interrupted the moment. An email from the head of HR, containing the latest quarterly report on staffing. Michael skimmed the subject line: turnover rate up 17% in logistics, tech services, and internal support. His brow furrowed. These numbers hadn't appeared before. Novacor had long been known as a place with remarkably low attrition. He opened the full report, scanning for reasons. Salaries were stable, benefits unchanged. Something's not right, he muttered. Just as he reached to call Evelyn Cross for clarification, another alert appeared on screen. Internal strategy briefing, Phoenix Room, 10 a.m. Leads: Nathan Crowell, Blake Stratton, Celeste Drayton. Michael nodded. That trio was among his most trusted executives, dynamic, sharp, and deeply capable. They had helped drive Novacor's brand growth, spearheaded digital transformation, and won numerous prestigious awards. But what he didn't know was, at that very moment, down on the 6th floor, a meeting room door closed softly behind 3 people. There were no slide decks, no marketing charts, just a thin file with a handwritten title in red ink: Power Transfer Strategy, Phase 1. Nathan Crowell leaned back in his chair, voice gravelly but controlled. Michael's an ethical figurehead, but in today's climate, ethics are weakness. We need leadership willing to cause pain for profit. Blake Stratton smirked, his eyes glinting with excitement. I can reshape internal narratives, influence media, and tweak survey data to reflect a loss of confidence in current leadership. Celeste Drayton nodded subtly, just enough for the board to start doubting. And once doubt takes hold, power slips. They didn't laugh. They didn't call it betrayal. They called it strategy, restructuring, optimizing executive alignment. Michael Hayes, up on the 41st floor, still believed everything was under control. What he didn't realize was that a fracture was already running through the tower. From its foundations, all the way up to where he stood, and only one person, his mother, on the lowest floor, had started to hear the first faint sounds of it breaking. 10:14 p.m., 7th floor, auxiliary office wing. The squeaking of cartwheels echoed down the carpeted hallway. Loretta, dressed in her worn janitor uniform, a baseball cap pulled low, rubber gloves on, bent down to scrub away faint specks on the polished marble floor. Her back ached, but not because of age. It was the scene before her, a workplace stripped of warmth. No one laughed, no one spoke. Employees passed by her as if she were a column, a fixture, or a ghost. She had once believed that at Novacor everyone held value dash, from the CEO to the janitor. But now that value had been replaced by performance metrics, KPIs, and quiet fear. She had just finished cleaning the printing area when sharp footsteps approached. A stern male voice echoed behind her. I thought I said this area should be spotless at the start of your shift. She turned. It was Nathan Crowell, a middle-aged man with icy eyes and an air of arrogance. He didn't look her in the eye, only at the floor. Then, with a flick, he let a drop of coffee spill from his paper cup, right in front of her face. Clean it again, and this time use your hands, no mop. I want to be sure you understand the standard here." Loretta said nothing. She knelt down, dipped her cloth into the bucket, and scrubbed the same spot again and again, feeling the weight of Nathan's contempt burning into her back. A few employees walked by. They saw, they heard, but no one stopped. No one intervened. Only one woman paused, petite, hair tied back, wearing the same janitor uniform as Loretta. Her eyes flickered with a trace of empathy before she lowered her head and moved on. Loretta didn't know her name yet, but she would soon. After Nathan left, Loretta stood up and looked around. She made her way to the janitor's break room, a cramped space with a single plastic table, 2 flimsy chairs, and a water dispenser that had run dry. Ronald Tran, the quiet shift supervisor, was adjusting the handle on a broken mop. Loretta asked gently, "Is Mr. Crowell always like that?" Ronald didn't look up. He replied curtly, "With all of us, every day. No one files a complaint. You're new. Best not to ask too much." It wasn't the answer that broke Loretta's heart. It was the resignation in Ronald's voice, as if endurance had long been programmed into them. She sat down, pulling off her gloves and wiping her hands. Outside, the printers hummed. Cold fluorescent lights poured down onto walls, bare of photos or paintings. Only slogans like "Maximize productivity, lead the industry," "Initiative, innovation, victory." No mention of people, no place for compassion. Loretta realized what she had stepped into was no longer a company, but a machine. And inside that machine, someone like her was just an invisible gear. She looked up at the ceiling, listening to the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, and wondered how many people had been bent in these hallways without anyone hearing the sound of them break. As she returned to the hallway and pushed her cart once more, she made herself a quiet vow. If the soul of Novacore is decaying, then here, in these cold, lifeless halls, I will find out where it began to die. 11:27 p.m., 5th floor, office tech wing. The sharp smell of bleach mixed with the dust of old photocopiers made the air even more suffocating. Loretta was wiping a glass hallway door when she heard it. A voice laced with profanity, harsh and angry, echoing from the women's restroom. A toilet slammed, a loud thud, then someone trying to hold back sobs. She stopped scrubbing and quickly made her way toward the sound. The door was ajar. Inside, Isabel Mendoza, the thin, brown-skinned woman Loretta had seen on her first night, was trembling, picking up torn cleaning cloths from the floor. Nearby, a pair of polished leather shoes were stained with splashes of bleach. Faint white marks like accusations. And standing there, face flushed with rage, was Nathan Crowell. "How many times have I told you not to use that spray near my leather? These are genuine Ferragamos, you idiot." He growled the words without lowering his voice, even though the door was open. Isabel bowed her head, voice trembling. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." "Sorry?" Nathan stepped forward, yanked the spray bottle from her hands, and tossed it into the trash. "If this happens again, you can go clean bathrooms at the central bus station. That's more your level." He turned to leave, bumping the door open with his shoulder. And his eyes met Loretta's, who stood silently in the hallway. For a brief moment, they locked eyes. Loretta felt her entire body go rigid, not from fear, but from the way he looked right through her, as if she weren't a person at all. Just air, trash, or an object in his way. Nathan didn't speak. He simply glanced her up and down, muttering, "Watch where you're standing, Janice," and walked on. Isabel remained hunched over, collecting the scraps. Loretta stepped in, kneeling beside her. They said nothing for a few seconds, only the soft sound of stifled breathing in silence. "Are you all right?" Loretta asked gently. Isabel shook her head slightly, but tears rolled down her rubber gloves. "Does he do this often?" This time Isabel looked at her, red-eyed, and nodded. "One time I dropped a design sketch from the tech team. It wasn't even my fault. Someone from marketing put it in the wrong pile. But he made me apologize in front of the whole floor. Made me read a handwritten apology letter." Loretta felt her chest tighten, not just from the story, but from that all-too-familiar look of resignation. She had seen it before. In immigrants, in invisible laborers, in the voiceless. In the early days of building Nova Corps. She handed Isabel a tissue. Isabel took it with trembling hands, trying to smile. "You're new here. You should stay away from him. If you push back, he'll get you fired." Just like that. Loretta didn't answer. She stood quietly, turned on the sink, warmed a cloth under the water, and began wiping the stain on Isabel's shoes. Not Nathan's. Isabel froze. "No one does that here." Loretta simply said, "Then maybe it's time someone did." After that night, Loretta began to see the bruises that didn't show on skin, but hid in people's eyes, in their hunched posture, in the silence they were forced to master just to survive. Invisible bruises. More painful than any slap, and more dangerous than any scheme. Because when people stop believing they deserve respect, they slowly forget who they are. 12:43 a.m. 9th floor, Brand Innovation Wing. Black and white checkered tile floors. Glass walls plastered with slick corporate slogans. Think bigger, push harder, win faster. This was the marketing floor of Nova Corps, and the personal domain of Blake Stratton, the young director and former startup prodigy who once graced magazine covers. Blake had it all: a polished appearance, a perfectly ironed shirt with razor-sharp creases, and a toothpaste commercial smile honed to perfection. But behind the image was a man who believed people were only valuable when obedient. Loretta, or rather Janice, had been assigned to clean Blake's area that night. As she pushed her cleaning cart into the hallway, the sharp sound of approaching shoes rang out, quick, clipped, and loud. Blake was storming toward her, coffee cup in one hand, phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care what the design team says. That slide has to convey trust while still evoking market dominance. If they don't get that, I'll find someone who does." He ended the call, glanced at Loretta, and stopped. "Hey, you." Loretta paused her mopping and turned around. "This floor was shining earlier. Now there's a water streak. Wipe it again." Loretta blinked. She clearly hadn't mopped that area yet. But not wanting to draw attention, she nodded and crouched to clean. Minutes later, as she moved to the opposite side, Blake returned. "Still dirty. I just walked by and saw dust." This time she saw it clearly. He had deliberately stepped outside into a dusty patch, then walked back to create the mark. "Need me to pull the camera footage?" Blake raised an eyebrow. "Or would you rather lose some hours off your shift?" Loretta said nothing, but inside something stirred. That old bitter taste of covert abuse. Not loud, not vulgar, just precise, calculated manipulation from someone with power and a sadistic sense of control. Blake smirked and added, as if to put a bow on his little power game, "Next time, do it right the first time. Don't make me train you." When he walked away, Loretta slumped into a chair. Sweat clung to the back of her neck despite the cold room. She had once led hundreds of employees, negotiated billion-dollar deals. But she had never been trained like this by someone 3 decades younger. As if she were a malfunctioning machine. Ronald Tran passed by. He gave her a look, then shook his head gently. Blake likes psychological training, picks one person a week to control. Last week it was Isabel. Guess it's your turn. Loretta asked quietly, and people just let it happen. Ronald didn't answer. He simply handed her a back pain patch, then walked away. Loretta returned to work, but her chest was heavy. She had just realized something more horrifying than violence. When oppression is repeated long enough, people begin to treat it as normal. When humiliation is called training, and degradation is praised as mental resilience, then the collective soul of that workplace has been fully manipulated. She had once heard the term modern psychological slavery. Now she was living in the heart of it. No chains, no lashes, just an environment where the weak have forgotten they once had dignity. Loretta mopped the floor again. But the real stain wasn't on the tiles. It was embedded in Novacor's leadership system, where those who mastered suppression were glorified as high-efficiency managers. And she knew Blake Stratton was only the tip of the iceberg. 1:29 a.m., 4th floor, Human Resources Department. Etched in gold across the frosted glass door, Evelyn Cross, Director of Human Resources. Loretta stood before it for nearly a full minute, mop in hand, eyes fixed on the nameplate. Evelyn, the woman who once stood beside Loretta from the earliest days. The first hire Loretta made when Novacor was just 12 employees sharing a co-working space. She used to call Evelyn her irreplaceable right hand. The memories flooded in late-night meetings until 2 a.m. The times Evelyn declined lucrative offers from larger firms because she believed in Loretta's vision. And now, separated by only a few floors, Loretta was no longer Loretta. She was Janice, a janitor with a sore back, a raspy voice, and a temporary employee badge. After what she'd witnessed, Nathan verbally abusing an immigrant worker, Blake psychologically manipulating staff, Loretta needed answers, and she believed if anyone still had a shred of conscience left at Novacor, it had to be Evelyn. She knocked. A cold voice called out, "Come in." Inside was a spotless office, not a single stray document in sight. Evelyn sat upright behind a sleek glass desk, typing on her laptop without looking up. Loretta entered, doing her best to maintain Janice's subdued posture and gravelly tone. "Sorry to bother you, Ms. Cross. I have something I'd like to report." Evelyn paused, raised her head. Her eyes swept across Loretta, with no hint of recognition, no surprise. "What is it?" I personally saw Mr. Crowell verbally abuse a cleaning staff member. His words were extremely demeaning, and Mr. Blake kept making me re-clean the same area for no clear reason. I think there may be bullying happening here." Evelyn cut her off, voice even. "If you can't handle the pressure of the job, you're free to submit a resignation. No one's forcing you to stay." Loretta froze, not because of what was said, but because of how devoid of emotion Evelyn's face had become. This was the same Evelyn who once stood for employee rights, who once fought for every little benefit. Now colder than any corporate policy. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I just hope someone might care, or at least investigate." Evelyn closed her laptop and stood up. "We don't investigate based on feelings or unsubstantiated stories. Novacor is a professional organization. No one is forced to remain here. Her tone wasn't raised, but it was sharp enough to cut off any hope. If Ms. Mendoza feels harmed, she may file a formal complaint through the internal system. As for you, a probationary janitor, if you feel this job is not suitable, I can assist you in processing your file withdrawal. Loretta didn't respond. She looked deeply into Evelyn's eyes, searching for something that might still remain. But all she found was a sheet of glass, cold, polished, and indifferent, a reflection of the very building they were in. Evelyn continued, "Novacor can't survive if it stops to listen to every little whimper. We need people who can adapt." With a decisive motion, she opened the office door, signaling the meeting was over. Loretta walked out, her heart heavy. She hadn't been yelled at, she hadn't been fired. But the cold indifference, the bone-deep apathy, was the most painful blow of all. She wasn't facing a broken organization, she was facing a system perfectly programmed to rationalize inhumanity. Evelyn Cross, the same woman who once believed that a good HR professional protects human dignity, was now the silent gatekeeper for the manipulators. Loretta stepped back into the hallway. The fluorescent lights cast her shadow long and thin, and for the first time since donning her disguise, she felt utter despair. If even Evelyn has stepped back, how many allies do I have left? She didn't know, but she did know one thing. Silence won't save Novacor. Someone has to break the cycle, and if no one else would, she would be the first. 8:59 a.m. 10th floor conference room, Vision Hall. The second hand ticked past the number 9 on the wall clock. Mid-level employees from various departments quietly settled into their seats, none daring to speak out loud. The air in the room was thick, as if someone had laced the AC with fear. This was the quarterly review meeting, presided over by Celeste Drayton, Vice President of Strategic Development. Anyone who had ever sat in a meeting with Celeste knew this was not a place for discussion. It was a place for orders, and if you didn't understand the orders, you were replaced. Loretta was present, but not in a seat. She was crouched on the floor, scrubbing the edge of a walnut wood conference table, moving silently like a ghost. Her grey janitorial uniform was damp at the knees. The back of her shirt was streaked with dust from the chair legs. But no one looked at her. No one asked if she was tired. They walked past her as if she were part of the furniture. At the front, Celeste prepped her slides, wearing a charcoal skirt suit, hair in a tight bun, voice sharp as a razor. "I want this meeting to stay focused. No rambling, no wasted time. Nathan will present the cost-cutting strategy. Blake will go over the new branding campaign. Then I'll finalize my recommendations for executive role adjustments." Right then, a young employee spilled his coffee on the floor. Panicked, he scrambled to grab some napkins. Loretta, cleaning nearby, immediately moved over, kneeling down to wipe the spill before it reached anyone's shoes. But just as she reached out her hand, a stiletto heel stepped back. Celeste had turned around. Smack! The contact wasn't hard, but the coffee splattered up her pant leg. Just a faint streak. But it was enough to spark rage in a room full of silence. Celeste turned, staring at Loretta like she was filth. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't wait for one. She raised her hand and slapped Loretta hard. The sound echoed across a room of more than 40 people. "Are you blind? Or just too senile to function?" Loretta didn't have time to react. Her face snapped to the side. The entire room froze. No one dared speak. Nathan looked away. Blake pressed his lips together, suppressing a smirk. Evelyn glanced at her phone, pretending not to notice. Everyone defaulted to silence, as if survival depended on it. Loretta slowly stood up, her eyes no longer avoiding. Her cheek burned, but her heart burned hotter. And in that moment, every hope she had, every belief that this company could still be saved, shattered. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice rough with humiliation. Sorry. Celeste stepped closer, her voice dropping, making it even more menacing. If I ever see you wandering into a boardroom again without permission, you won't work here another hour. Now get out. Loretta bowed her head and pushed her cleaning cart like a lifeless shell. When the doors to Vision Hall closed behind her, she rushed toward the emergency stairwell. Not out of fear, but because the fury swelling in her chest had risen to her throat, leaving her breathless. In the darkened corridor, she leaned against the wall. Her hand trembled as it touched her cheek, still warm from Celeste's slap. But then, in that depth of humiliation, something broke open inside her, and something else rose in its place. No longer sorrow, no longer disappointment, but a silent vow, sharp as a blade. No more slaps, no more humiliation. This will be the last time I kneel in the company I built. From that moment on, Loretta Hayes was no longer Janice to observe. She would begin to act, quietly but precisely, step by step, but unstoppable. 4:18 a.m., rented apartment, city outskirts. Loretta Hayes sat in the middle of a bare room, furnished with only a folding table, an old laptop, and a small black box in front of her. She took off her worn baseball cap, removed her silver wig, peeled off her gloves. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from lack of sleep, but from a decision she had just made. A decision that, in her past life as the founder, she would never have allowed herself to consider. To gather evidence, record audio, record video, to expose the betrayers using their own tools. In her hands was a set of miniature hidden cameras, the kind used for internal investigations. The very type she once opposed introducing into Novacore, not wanting to foster an environment of mistrust. Now she would use it to unmask those who had invoked progress to destroy the soul of the company. 6:02 a.m., Novacore sub-basement equipment room. Loretta carefully mounted the micro-camera to the frame of her cleaning cart, hidden beneath a layer of cleaning rags. At the other end, a mini audio recorder tucked inside a half-emptied bleach bottle. Everything was wired to a portable hard drive hidden in a janitor's closet on the second floor, where she had discreetly installed her own private lock. 8:43 p.m., 6th floor, internal meeting room, Orion. According to something she'd overheard from Ronald, an off-the-record meeting was scheduled to take place between Nathan Crowell, Blake Stratton, Evelyn Cross, and Celeste Drayton, just before they presented a proposed restructuring to the board. Loretta conveniently assigned herself to the cleaning shift during that hour and parked her cart near the Orion meeting room early, pretending to polish the windows. The lights in Orion flicked on. The door closed, but Loretta had positioned her cart precisely at the threshold, where sound waves and visuals could just barely slip through. 9:02 p.m., camera begins recording. Inside the small screen, nestled in her shirt pocket, the image appeared faint but discernible. Celeste with arms folded, Nathan holding a folder, Blake sitting cross-legged, Evelyn checking her phone. Nathan began, voice firm and measured. Michael's weakening by the day. He doesn't have the guts to restructure. He won't cut staff. The board will start to question him. Blake nodded. I'm reworking the brand confidence reports, adjusting employee trust indexes. One more quarter like this, and they'll see Michael Hayes as too costly to keep. Celeste chimed in, voice cold as steel. We need to draft the removal memo in advance. I'll pose as the neutral voice in the board meeting. And Evelyn, you'll handle the internal HR file. Evelyn responded tersely. I've already prepared a resignation template. If Michael doesn't sign voluntarily, we'll cite managerial incompetence to force it. Loretta froze. This wasn't personal conflict. This wasn't poor leadership. This was a coup, a calculated power grab, masked as a legitimate corporate process. And worse still, it was led by people who once vowed to uphold her founding philosophy. 11:04 p.m., Loretta's apartment. She removed the hard drive from the cleaning cart and connected it to her laptop. The audio came through crisp and undeniable. Every word of betrayal, every triumphant laugh, every nod of collusion. Loretta didn't cry. There was no disappointment left, only a razor-sharp focus. They want to overthrow my son, destroy my company, and crush the few decent souls who still remain. She stared at the playback footage. Celeste, legs crossed, voice imperial. Novacor doesn't need sentiment, it needs an iron hand. Loretta quietly powered off the screen. Then I'll show them whose hand really holds the power. 12:37 a.m. Michael Hayes' penthouse apartment, Midtown. A spacious apartment, bathed in warm golden light, with minimalist yet elegant furnishings, perfect for a young CEO living amidst both glamour and responsibility. Michael sat alone at his desk, eyes fixed on the HR report glowing on the screen. One hand slowly swirled a glass of neat whiskey, the other pressed against his temple. The numbers danced before his eyes, rising turnover rates, declining employee ratings, plummeting internal feedback. But no clear explanation. What is happening to Novacor? He muttered. Knock, knock. A quiet but firm knock at the door. Michael frowned. Who would come at this hour? He opened it. An older woman stood there, slender frame, worn baseball cap, thick reading glasses, a frayed canvas tote hanging from one shoulder. Janice, he said, surprised, recognizing the janitor he'd passed in the halls a few times. The woman removed her glasses, peeled off her wig. One by one, she removed the layers of disguise. She stood tall. His eyes widened. Mom? Loretta nodded, stepping inside slowly. She placed the canvas bag on the table and looked directly at her son. Her voice was calm, but carried a weight it had never carried before. We need to talk, and you need to hear everything. No interruptions, no doubt. Before Michael could speak, Loretta opened the bag and placed a hard drive and a stack of printed transcripts from videos and audio recordings onto the table. She opened her laptop, and then it all played. Nathan's words, Celeste's voice, Evelyn's nod. Blake's manipulated data engineered to create a false crisis. Michael sat frozen. His glass of whiskey slipped from his hand and shattered on the carpet. But neither of them noticed. 25 minutes later, he collapsed onto the sofa, burying his head in his hands. His face was pale, shaken. I can't believe this. Evelyn, Nathan, all of them. They're systematically removing you, Loretta said softly. I trusted them. I empowered them. Mum, I was so stupid. Loretta moved closer, sitting beside him and placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. No, Michael, you weren't stupid. You were kind. But Novacor is no longer a place for the kind. Michael looked up, voice still trembling. How long have you been back? 3 weeks, wearing a janitor's uniform, with a mop in hand, and my ears wide open. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to see the truth, not from reports, but from glances, sighs, and the things no one dares to say in boardrooms. He sat silent, eyes reddening. What do you plan to do now? Loretta asked, her tone low and steady. Michael clenched his fists. They think I'm weak. They believe kindness equals weakness. But they're wrong. He stood up, looking his mother in the eye, no longer a son in need of guidance, but a man who had chosen to rise. If they want to take me down quietly, then I'll expose them loudly, in front of the entire board. Loretta nodded, slowly but firmly. I'll be there, no more hiding, no more silence. Novacor must be reborn, not through power, but through truth. In that moment, there was no CEO, no founder, only a mother and her son, united in pain and standing side by side in the light. 8:01 a.m., 42nd floor, Echelon Executive Boardroom. A thin layer of grey clouds covered the sky above the city. Light from the floor-to-ceiling glass windows poured into the expansive boardroom, where black leather chairs surrounded a walnut oval table. It was here that multi-million-dollar decisions had once been signed. And today, a decision greater than money would be made. Who truly runs Novacor? Michael Hayes had personally convened this emergency board meeting, citing an urgent review of operational conditions and corporate culture. Senior executives entered one by one. Nathan Crowell, still in his signature navy suit, offering polite smiles but scanning the room with calculating eyes. Blake Stratton, adjusting his shirt collar in the mirror, hair slicked back, thumbing through his phone non-stop. Celeste Drayton, expressionless, walking in as if she were about to step onto a victory podium. Evelyn Cross, carrying a thick stack of documents, greeting no one, simply nodding before sitting down. All of them thought they knew what was about to happen. All of them believed Michael had been backed into a corner. And this meeting would be the final blow. They didn't know. The walls had been wired with explosives, and the one holding the detonator was standing just outside the door. 0807, just outside the boardroom. Loretta Hayes, dressed in her familiar janitor uniform, stood quietly beside her cleaning cart. No one inside paid her any attention. They were used to maintenance staff being around. But no one knew that hidden inside that cart, a recording device was running, a camera was rolling, and the woman pushing the mop was the legendary founder whose portrait once hung in the lobby. The door wasn't fully shut. Every word from inside spilled out loud and clear. 0809, inside the boardroom. Michael entered, his face calm, unreadable. He greeted each member, then sat down at the center seat. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin by hearing your general assessments. Nathan was the first to speak. I'll be blunt. Our internal operations are stagnating. Employee feedback indicates a loss of confidence. We need a strong restructuring, starting with re-evaluating executive leadership. Blake quickly followed up. From a branding standpoint, our current leadership lacks a sharp identity. We need someone with a stronger image, someone who can carry Novacor into the next era. Celeste emphasized each word. This isn't about Michael being incapable. It's just, the times have changed. Stability alone is no longer enough. Michael said nothing. He scanned the table, looking at each person in turn. Evelyn opened her folder. If needed, I've prepared a draft for temporary transfer of leadership for the board to review. The room fell into an eerie silence. The traitors waited for his reaction, but Michael only nodded slightly. Thank you. I think you've all made your positions quite clear. He stood up. slowly circled the table. I have just one small request. Before we come to any final decisions, let's watch a short video. Just a few minutes. Perhaps it'll help you see more clearly the new era you're all referring to. He gestured. An assistant activated the large screen at the front of the room. All eyes turned forward. The door to the boardroom opened just a bit more. Loretta stopped mopping. She stood upright, her hand resting on the recorder in her jacket pocket. The game had begun, and this time every eye would see. 8:17 a.m., Echelon Executive Boardroom, 42nd floor. The lights in the boardroom dimmed as the video began to play. At first, it was footage from a hidden camera. The corner of the Orion room, angled, low quality, but the voices rang out loud and clear. Everyone in the room was drawn in, transfixed by the screen. Michael is growing weaker by the day. Nathan's voice, deep and firm. We need someone who knows how to inflict pain in order to generate profit. Celeste, calm but ice cold. I'll handle the reports. I'll drag the numbers down. Blake, voice tinged with amusement. I've already prepared a sample resignation letter. Evelyn, without hesitation. The room was dead silent. A few board members unrelated to the plot glanced at each other in alarm. One muttered under his breath, "Is this real?" Nathan shot to his feet, shouting, "This is illegal evidence. Who gave permission to record an internal meeting without notice?" Blake slammed his hand on the table. "This is a privacy violation. I demand the video be stopped immediately." Michael said nothing. He simply looked toward the door, just as it slowly began to open. A soft click echoed through the room, louder than any speech ever delivered here. A woman stepped in, wearing a silver-gray janitor's uniform. A mop cart rolled quietly behind her, but her hands held no broom now. She walked straight forward, each step slow but full of undeniable power. Loretta Hayes. Celeste paled. Evelyn shot to her feet. "What are you doing here?" Nathan's voice trembled. Loretta didn't answer. She stopped in the center of the room, and in front of more than 10 board members and the entire executive team, she began to remove her disguise. First the baseball cap, then the reading glasses. Finally, the silver wig. Her real face emerged, older than the portrait once hung in the main lobby, tougher but unmistakable. A board member gasped, "Oh my God, it's her." Loretta Hayes. The truth crashed into the room like thunder in a clear sky. Loretta looked around. Every person who had mocked her, dismissed her as a shadow, now stood frozen, as if time itself had stopped. She took one step forward. Her voice rang out, not loud, not angry, but as clear and sharp as if each word were carved into the walnut table. "I am Loretta Hayes, founder of NovaCore Financial. I didn't return to be honored. I returned to see how far this company has rotted." A silence stretched so long it felt like centuries. She turned to Nathan. "You called me a senile old fool. So now I ask, do you think you're fit to remain here for even one more day?" Then to Evelyn, "You once told me a great company protects its weakest link. Now you've become the one crushing them." Finally, Loretta addressed the entire board. "I've listened, I've seen, I've recorded, and today I stand here, not for revenge, but to defend those who quietly keep NovaCore from collapsing. The janitors, the tech staff, the support teams, the ones without voices, but with souls." The room was frozen in stunned silence. Michael rose from his seat and walked to stand beside his mother. The two stood together like two sides of the same coin, one the root, the other the future. Loretta nodded. Michael turned to the board. "We have more evidence, but I believe this is enough. We await your decision." No one said a word, because there was nothing left to say. 8:24 a.m. Echelon Boardroom. No one dares leave their seat. After Loretta revealed her identity, the room seemed frozen. Those who once held power now sat like wax figures. No more accusations from them, no more condescending stares. Only one thing remained: the fear of being truly seen. Michael nodded to his assistant. The screen interface changed, this time not just an audio recording. The screen flared to life. Footage from the hidden camera in the janitor's cart began to play. Nathan Crowell threw a spray bottle into the trash and shouted in Isabel Mendoza's face with pure contempt. Blake Stratton deliberately dirtied the floor and then threatened a Janice to keep cleaning it over and over, smirking coldly as he said, "I need employees to know their place under my feet." Evelyn Cross, sitting in her office, coldly told Loretta, "If you can't handle the pressure, then don't stay." And finally, the secret meeting in the Orion room, the plan to oust Michael, manipulate data, and control the media. Each clip was like a blade slicing through the web of deception they had built over the years. A board member, Mr. Martinez, a longtime shareholder, stood up, hands on the table, face flushed red. "This is the worst thing I've ever seen at Novacor, and I lived through the 2008 financial crisis." Another, Ms. Leung, shook her head in disbelief. "I can't believe you, Evelyn. You used to lead our ethics training." Celeste tried to stay composed, or at least appear so. She lifted her chin and spoke as if giving a keynote speech. "These recordings were made illegally, without consent. We have the right to sue for privacy violation." Loretta stepped forward, locking eyes with Celeste. "Privacy can't shield a rotten heart. You're not victims. You've simply been exposed." Michael stood beside his mother. His voice was steady and clear. "And because you used power to crush others in the dark, today, the light will be justice." He turned to the board members. "I propose an immediate vote to remove 4 individuals from leadership: Nathan Crowell, Chief Operating Officer; Blake Stratton, Chief Marketing Officer; Evelyn Cross, Chief Human Resources Officer; Celeste Drayton, Vice President of Strategic Development." The air grew heavier than stone. One by one, hands began to rise. Mr. Martinez, Ms. Leung, then one after another. No one dared object. The evidence was too damning. Blake leapt to his feet. "This is a setup, just a cheap performance." Michael cut him off, his gaze sharp as a blade. "The cheap performance is how you pretended to be leaders. But the show's over." Nathan stood, growling, "She's just the founder. She holds no executive role." Loretta smiled slightly. "I don't need a title. I have the truth, and Novacor has no room left for people who only know how to perform." Moments later, the official vote was recorded. All 4 were dismissed immediately, pending disciplinary review and handover procedures. Celeste reached for her phone, perhaps to call someone. But security had already appeared at the door. They stepped in quietly but firmly, glancing toward Michael. He nodded. Loretta didn't look back as the 4 were escorted out. But in her heart, she knew the darkness had been split open, and the light, even just a sliver, was enough to change everything. 8:47 a.m., 42nd floor hallway, Novacor headquarters. The doors of the Echelon boardroom swung open. No one said a word. 4 people walked out. No microphones, no authority, no shields. Nathan Crowell walked in front, his face ashen, jaw clenched as if still unable to believe what had just happened. The man who once humiliated janitors now could only lower his head, avoiding the gaze of those very same workers. Blake Stratton, a face that had once exuded confidence in every branding campaign, now twisted in rage. His fingers tapped furiously on his phone, but no one was picking up. Every door was now shutting. Evelyn Cross, the woman once revered as the brain of HR, walked like a shadow. No apology, no backward glance. As if she moved fast enough, she could outrun her conscience. Celeste Drayton came last, still holding her head high. But for the first time, her eyes had lost their steel. There was only emptiness. She knew she had lost. Not because she lost her position, but because she was publicly defeated by the same woman she once slapped in a full boardroom. Ground floor, main lobby. Loretta Hayes descended the stairs slowly, no longer in her janitor's uniform. She now wore a crisp white shirt, simple black slacks, and carried herself with unmistakable confidence. From each floor, employees began to look on. Those who had once seen her ordered around. Those who had watched her kneel to clean another's shoes. Now they watched her walk down the hallway, no longer invisible. No one applauded, no one cheered. There was only silence, heavy and full of realization. The realization that the woman they had called Janice, the senile old lady, was in fact the founder of Novacor, and she had just removed 4 senior executives like extracting a tumor. At the building's main entrance, security guards raised their hands, gesturing for the 4 to exit. Nathan started to object. But a young employee, the very one Nathan once scolded for dropping papers, stepped forward and blocked the door, his expression calm. Nathan said nothing more. He walked out. The glass door closed behind him. Blake flung his ID badge onto the floor. No one picked it up. Celeste turned back for one final glance at Loretta, but Loretta simply looked at her, not with anger, but with a gaze that no longer saw her as a rival at all. Your arrogance made you believe you were untouchable, but that same arrogance kept you from seeing the cliff beneath your feet. Loretta's voice was even, like a blade freshly sharpened. 9:04 a.m., 42nd floor, boardroom. Michael turned to face the board members. Novacor just endured a painful test, but thanks to the truth, and to a woman who refused to stay silent, we've come through it. Mr. Martinez nodded, eyes misty. We owe her more than applause. Loretta stood quietly at the back of the room. No need to step to the center, no need for a title. But today, she had reclaimed the soul of the company. The fall of the arrogant didn't come with an explosion. It didn't come with shouting. It came through a silence so clear, no one believed them anymore. 2 p.m., Novacor Central Atrium, ground floor. The portrait of Loretta Hayes had been restored to its rightful place in the main lobby, a space once dominated by performance charts and cold growth graphs. Now beneath that portrait, hundreds of employees had gathered, from department directors, HR, and engineering, to those still wearing janitorial uniforms like Isabel Mendoza, Ronald Tran, and the entire support staff. A simple wooden platform had been set up in the center of the atrium. No stage lights, no theme music, just a microphone, and a silence thick with anticipation. Michael Hayes stepped up to the podium first. His eyes scanned the crowd. No one spoke, but no one looked away. I stand here today, not as the CEO. I stand here as someone who let this company drift from its core values. Someone who trusted the wrong people and stayed silent for too long. He paused, took a deep breath, then continued, I've seen the truth, not through reports, but through the eyes of those we forgot. I've heard the stories I should have heard long ago. If only I had stepped down from the 42nd floor and walked the hallways the way my mother did. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Everyone now knew that Janice, the quiet older woman cleaning the floors these past few weeks, was none other than Loretta Hayes, their founder. Michael adjusted the microphone, his gaze steady. I declare, from today forward, Novacor will no longer be a company measured solely by growth or profit. We will measure ourselves by how we treat each other, with transparency, with voice, and with dignity. Applause began, faint at first, from the back where the janitorial team stood. Then it spread forward, growing stronger. Michael raised his hand for quiet and then invited someone to the stage. No one else but Loretta Hayes. Loretta stepped up, holding a small sheet of paper, not a speech, but a list of notes she had written over the 3 weeks she spent as Janice. She looked down at the crowd, and for the first time in years, her eyes brimmed with emotion. I don't need to repeat who I am. Many of you saw me bent over, cleaning floors. You didn't greet me. You didn't notice. You didn't know. I don't blame anyone. I just want to ask one thing. What kind of company have we become when a worker can be publicly humiliated in a hallway and no one stops to help? How far have we drifted from our values when the fear of losing a job is stronger than a person's conscience? The entire atrium fell silent. I walked through every floor. I saw the people who keep this company running, but who are never truly heard. And today I promise they will never be forgotten again. Loretta gently clenched the sheet of paper in her hand, then let it fall to the floor, like a symbol of the outdated things that needed to change. Novacor will begin again, not from strategy, but from the heart. Michael returned to the microphone, his voice clear. Starting next week, we will begin our reforms, including establishing an internal feedback council with representatives from all departments, including janitorial, technical, and maintenance staff. Implementing a protected anonymous reporting policy for misconduct, and most importantly, relaunching the People First cultural training program led by Loretta Hayes herself. This time the applause was thunderous, not because they were told to, but because they had waited so long for this. At the back of the crowd, Ronald Tran gripped his work cap tightly. Isabel Mendoza embraced a colleague beside her. Tears fell, but her smile shone through. From the rear of the atrium, a young employee raised his hand. "Mrs. Hayes, are you staying?" Loretta looked at him, then at Michael. She nodded. "I won't return to lead, but I will be here. To listen, not from above, but right here, among you." 6 weeks later, headquarters of Novacor Financial. It was early spring. Sunlight streamed through the glass walls, now adorned with newly planted greenery in the main lobby. It was no longer a cold, empty space. Novacor was now brighter, more vibrant, and most importantly, more human. A new sign had been installed at the main entrance. Novacor Financial, success begins with dignity. Beneath it, in smaller lettering, co-founders of this philosophy, Loretta Hayes and Michael Hayes. 3rd floor, newly reformed HR meeting room. A group of janitors, maintenance workers, technicians, administrators and mid-level managers sat around a round table, all participating in a meeting of the Internal Feedback Council. No one was excluded. No one was considered lower tier. Everyone had the right to speak, and they had begun to speak. Stories of real pressure, unresolved frustrations, and small ideas that were never heard before. Now all were on the table. Seventh floor, Creative and Branding Department. There were no more shouting matches, no more corridors echoing with leather shoes and barking orders. Blake Stratton was gone, but something else had arrived, a spirit of collaboration. A young female employee, once forced by Blake to re-clean the floor for no reason, now led the internal communications team, working with the logistics department to create a video series. A day in the life of honoring the unsung heroes. Ground floor, main lobby. Loretta Hayes entered through the rear door, not in a luxury car, not by private elevator. She wore a small badge, cultural advisor, non-executive. She still walked the hallways like before, greeting each person by name. No one avoided her gaze anymore. They smiled, they nodded, they stopped to say hello. An older security guard murmured to her as she passed, "Thank you, Mum. In all my years, I've never seen a company change for real. Now I believe it." Loretta smiled. Change doesn't come from decisions, but from people brave enough to stand up. 42nd floor, CEO's office. Michael Hayes sat in his redesigned office. Now, with no frosted glass, no isolation, the door was always open. Anyone could knock, and he was always ready to listen. He had just signed the official founding documents for the NovaCare Fund, a scholarship and vocational training program for the children of logistics and support staff. A dream Loretta once held, but never had the chance to realize. On his desk sat two framed photographs. One, Loretta in her youth, smiling beside NovaCore's first office sign, dated 1994. The other, Loretta in her janitor uniform, mopping the floor outside the executive boardroom. Beneath the second photo, a small plaque read, "True leadership begins with ears that listen and a heart that kneels." That evening, NovaCore rooftop. Loretta and Michael stood together, watching the city as sunset spread across the skyline. No words were needed. A soft breeze, steady heartbeats, everything in its right place. Michael turned and asked, "Do you think NovaCore will be okay?" Loretta gazed into the distance, then nodded. Not just okay, it's coming back to life. And so a company that once seemed to have lost its soul was reborn. Not through power, not through capital, but because one ordinary woman dared to descend to the very bottom, to reignite the light. Not everyone who carries a mop is invisible. Not everyone who stays silent is weak, and not everyone on the lower floors will bow forever. The story of Loretta Hayes is not just about a company. It's about every place where power once made people forget kindness. She didn't return to reclaim fame. She returned to remind us, if no one dares to speak the truth, be the first. NovaCore was reborn, not through miracles, but because one woman dared to face the rot and refused to turn away. Because sometimes transforming an entire organization starts with one simple question: can we still see the human in one another?